Hi, this is Aaron Azrod, and welcome to the 52nd episode of the Truth Island podcast. An often misunderstood stream of belief that has gained popularity in recent years are religions that fall under the umbrella of paganism. In fact, the term pagan was a term often used by Christians to describe other religions that did not fall under the traditional Abrahamic belief system. However, the term is now widely used to describe anything from fortune tellers to people who practice Wicca. But what exactly is paganism? And does it present a worldview completely at odds with Judeo Christian belief? Our media has done a very poor job, often portraying worshippers as either belonging to some type of elite cult that practice sacrificing animals, or as being a bunch of teenagers that are just a little bit too much into Magic the Gathering. Fair and accurate representations of those who may subscribe to a pagan style of belief remain few and far between. Joining me, however, to give us an introduction to paganism and perhaps clear some of the misconceptions that I may personally have picked up over the years is Fedra, a tarot card reader, musician, and someone familiar with paganism. Fedra, I'm envisioning us having a wonderful discussion today.
My perspective is that paganism is very much how you said, pretty much anyone that is worshiping more than one all-seeing God, all-knowingness of God. So this
Hmm.
is many gods. So we can go into Native Americans, we can go into Greek and Roman, we can go into Norse and Celtic, I believe. So it's really such a broad umbrella, like you said, that we can go into many different directions.
So it's
One lady,
definitely a polytheism like religion.
yes, and one lady I was listening to recently also was saying, do we consider Hinduism a part of that? And when I thought of that, I was like, that is a great question, but we would say that it is their own structure.
Hmm.
Do we put that part of paganism? So that's also a part where it's very confusing of like, do we? Like, how do you really categorize it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because I think Eastern religions are a thing unto themselves. So like paganism, it's almost as if we talk about polytheistic religions that existed only in Europe, right? Am I right in saying that?
It's very popular that we know of that, not in East or Asian culture or in India as well. Like we don't really know, or we don't dive into that part. It's really known for witches and for folklore and for the Greeks and the Romans, and they create Greek mythology that we're all like a love and addicted to the tragedy of it. But then we don't think of, is that something that in past that we really embraced as a belief in, and I'm talking just in humanity's sake. Sorry, I like to talk very broad, because we see in, I'm a huge film fan, so I'm going to be describing a lot of stuff with film so people can get that visionary part. But one thing I thought was very beautiful and simple in the movie The Gladiator
Yeah,
is
yeah.
when he had small miniature statues of his deities, and he buried them with his family. And so that's not very a thing that's practiced now. But in Christianity, we have images of Jesus, of Mother Mary, of those saints. But for some reason, that's not considered similar.
Mm, mm.
That's different.
Now, you're actually touching upon something very interesting because, in a way, without even knowing it, all of us have been exposed to paganism when we read Greek mythology, when we read about Zeus, when we read about all of these Greek gods. I'm wondering why it is in our education system we always just refer to that as Greek mythology and we never refer to it as paganism.
I think it's because of also the negative connotations that we have of paganism. We wouldn't want to say that we're teaching children about witchcraft and about, believing in multiple things and worshiping the elements. That's not science. Why would we worshiping, the elements of the seasons and the harvest, when I think it's something very much to embrace. I think that's what was very misunderstood by Native Americans. They
Hmm.
not only worshipped their harvest, they worshipped their ancestors. They worshipped, the seasons changing. They worshipped the animals, and they actually prayed when they killed. Something that was practiced throughout. It wasn't just a few holidays and call it a day.
No, that's interesting because we obviously in Western culture we love the Greeks. We absolutely love them, and we think that they were just filled to the brim with absolute wisdom. But when we think about it, there's things like oracles and signs and all this other stuff. But it's almost as if, like, if we use the word paganism, it has, like you just said, a negative connotation, and that it somehow gets clumped in with witchcraft. But it's just interesting that we kind of discriminate as between like good paganism and bad paganism. And if something is good paganism, we just call it, oh, that's not paganism, that's Greek mythology.
Nicely decorated, right? With
Yeah,
just
yeah.
just a different word, different title. And then there's all these imageries in Greek mythology that is throughout in Christianity as well. The spears, the
Mm,
shields, the crowns, the gowns. I mean,
right.
it's all there. Like, and I'm not trying to be like, hey, can you see the similarity? It's just about, we are fascinated with it, by this imagery, by this belief, and yet it's something that you kind of read and put away and go toward Christianity. If you are, a Christian, if you practice paganism, it's something that I've seen where you're more open to accepting of all other religious structures.
Mm, mm.
And that's something I've seen in attitudes with people that, I'm not discounting that. If you really truly feel that this structure helps you, then so be it. It's the push of, this is the structure that only works. And that's the theme that I've seen, that in paganism, if you want to call it light paganism or good paganism, I've seen that not happen.
The key word here is this word mythology here. So I think if we called it pagan mythology, it would probably have like such a greater acceptance in our society. It's only when we call something a religion that we see it in competition with Judaism or Christianity or any of that other stuff. So I think it's like it's basically we can gain wisdom from it, but because it has like pagan religion, oh, that's like competition. That's like, McDonald's being like, oh, that's a Burger King over there. That's our direct competition. But
Right.
if we call something mythology, then it's like, oh, well, we don't have to take this as seriously, and therefore we can read as much as we want about it because it's not in competition with our direct belief structure.
I think it also states more that it's ancient past,
Yes,
something
yes.
forgotten, something not practiced. Whereas religious scripture and religious text is practiced in the now. Since then, it's the way it always has been. So that kind of ultimatum also can be very, scary for someone who's just wanting to look. I mean, I've seen comments on videos where people are just like, well, I practiced this, but I was just curious to watch this video. It's like, you wouldn't say that if you were reading a Greek mythology book
Yeah,
or
no, you
watch the
wouldn't.
Titans,
And the other thing is that like in Greek and Roman mythology, they actually use the word gods with like a plural s over there, which is, polytheism, and is definitely a direct contradiction of like the monotheistic beliefs of Abrahamic religions. But that somehow is okay. That's okay. Even Walt, like I'll give you an example. Disney has made a movie about Hercules, right? And that's like totally fine. But I bet if they tried to make a movie about some pagan, see, I'm so like inept in the subject, like I can't even use anybody that comes to mind. But if they use some probably a pagan archetypal figure, they'd probably get flack for it.
Oh, I got you. In the Princess and the Frog movie, it's in New Orleans, and the tarot reader is evil.
Oh, whoa, wow. Yes.
Now they have a practicing paganist woman. I don't know what her name was, but they called her Mama, and she's in a white gown and she lives in the middle of the swamp. And
Hmm.
because she was around all the animals and everything, she was good. And it
Yes.
showed that in not only their demeanor and what they said and they practiced, but they also showed that in imagery that he was in black and red and
Yeah.
she was in white, which was very
Ah.
interesting too, with the gown and the difference in that also.
You're
It's
making me think everything as a kid, because now that I think of all these Disney movies, there is, like, if you think of like the witch in Snow White and in Cinderella, there is like a cauldron, and there's this like obviously, like, it's she's not described directly as being a pagan, but it's this idea that she's practicing some otherness. There's like an otherness to her religious beliefs that are sinister in nature. So I think that this is something that
yes.
pervades our nature, and they may not use, like, the Disney people probably aren't going to use the word pagan to a bunch of like 6-year-olds, but there's this idea that like this person is practicing something that you shouldn't be practicing.
Oh yes. In Sleeping Beauty, Maleficent was a sorceress.
Mm,
In Snow White, it was a queen who was a witch. And of course, in both, they portrayed, and I know we're going into a different subject when I say this, but I gotta say it as a woman, they paint this beautiful, powerful woman, and then within the same token, they shift her into being this awful, vile, ugly, powerful thing,
mm.
wanting to tamper with the youth. And I really think that is a theme in when people claim you are a witch of any sort, or you practice Wicca, so automatically you're going down a deceitful route.
Yeah.
When in fact it's like, I wish there would be more conversation, because we have seen in terrible light what has happened in the Catholic Church, and things that have been done that were deceitful in that own religious context. So, but we are not going to say that all Christians are like that or will do those things. So why is this perpetuate attitude in paganism?
Paganism just can't shake the bad rap. And let's kind of like fast forward. So we have like the ancient Greeks practicing paganism, and then you have the Middle Ages. Is there anything notable happening with paganism during the Middle Ages? From my understanding, the pagans were kind of outside the feudal system altogether. They kind of lived on the outskirts of these feudal areas. How were they seen? Because I know that Jews were definitely not seen in the best of light during the Middle Ages. I'm wondering how were pagans seen during the Middle Ages?
So to me, with reading it, it's actually men and women that were actually a holistic doctor or a holistic therapist. You had a problem and you couldn't really go to the church and talk about it, so you had to go somewhere else.
Got to go
And
somewhere to get
so,
that bubonic plague solved.
right. And so people made herbs and people did potions and people wrote different books on it and practiced very holistic things that, if the church doesn't condone, then it's evil. And so I think that's where, again, we go back to this very, structure, and I get it. A part of this structure was to keep people alive, to keep people in line, and I get that. But at the same time, not everyone was out to get anyone. I mean, there were, women that were doulas that were, just being midwives. They were just helping women give birth naturally. Nothing, devilish there. That understanding of wanting certain men of power, certain devoted women in science as nurses or doctors or practitioners there in the Middle Ages, that it was only them that have those answers. It was only them that could really make those decisions. And anyone that got in their way, you kind of got burnt at the stake.
That's now this is very interesting, because it's like, perhaps now, would you consider alchemy to also be a part of paganism? Did that kind of go hand
Yes.
in hand? Okay. So you have these doctors that are pagan in nature, and they, may or may not be healing people, but there's maybe a chance, maybe there is some kind of ointment. Like, let's just say, for example, I scratch my leg and it's about to get infected. Maybe by some chance the pagan doctor comes and he rubs some healing ointment and it actually works. Is it basically like the church is getting a bit jealous of this, saying, whoa, 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 we can't have anybody curing cuts with ointments or herbs that they found in the forest. You have to kind of just be, we're the only doctors. We're like the giant HMO that solves everything. We can't have any other doctors coming here and healing things.
From what I've read, that's really my interpretation. It's really that these are the structures. And if you did not follow the rules, then chances are you got this because you were punished. You got this because of your family, or you got this because of your class system, or you got this because of something. And if you stepped out of that and went another way, you were going against your society, you were going against your God, you were going against Jesus, you were going against your, religious sector. And so because you were falling through that, you were going into no man's land. You were going into the unknown, which, in society was just like not heard of. You just don't do that. I just also wanted to point out that we have to think of also at that time men and women that were not getting married. If
Mm.
you were independent and single in the Middle Ages, there was something wrong with you. I mean, no doubt. I mean, if you really want to go, into that, they conspired and interrogated and tortured people to want to know what is wrong with you. Why are you in the forest all the way over there on your own? Why are you secluded? Why are you not married? Why do you not have children? Why have you not been baptized?
Right, right.
All those things.
So it's this idea, and there was also this idea in the Middle Ages of indulgences. So you could basically pay money and get your sins forgiven. And this was actually a huge source of revenue to the Catholic Church during the Middle Ages. You do something wrong, you cheat on your wife, but then you go to confession, you pay the church, the church a bunch of money, and now you're not going to hell. So in a way, the paganism is kind of leading people away from necessarily like directly repenting or directly dealing with their sins, because if somebody can use like an ointment to get that scar or to get that infection away, it's causing them to not seek their salvation directly from the church and in turn grapple with their sins.
Well, we're not there yet, but I mean, I'm thinking if you want to go the light, natural, good, quote unquote, paganism, that's really the route I felt it was to just nurture things around them, really worship the elements, be just a very down to earth. I know that's funny, but hey, enjoying my pun, just down to earth way of worshiping, and just didn't want to follow that societal structure.
That's interesting. So when you say the pagans were living separately, were they at all nomadic, or did they actually have their own places in Europe where they just permanently congregated?
That I don't really know. I really think some were in hiding and kind of had double lives, maybe. I know that there were some in the woods living, nomadically or travelers, really. But
Hmm.
that I don't have a particular idea.
As I think there's a good reason, because they probably did not want their whereabouts to be too well known. Like if it was established that, the pagans are all living in modern day Sweden, I'm just throwing that out as an example, it's like then people may have hunted them down, or maybe they would have been forced to convert. So kind of keeping their whereabouts on the down low, or constantly being in a state of travel and living this very transient nature may have protected them in some way.
Yes, I mean, definitely in the Middle Ages, you did have to follow a certain route or you had to do what you had to do. And, the lifespan of a person wasn't very long either.
You had to stay alive at all costs. So we're in the Middle Ages, and let's fast forward now to, let's say, the Salem witch trials, right? This is like another big encounter that we have with paganism in the form of. Now, the Salem witch trials make me really scratch my chin, because you've got a pretty much Christian nation, Christian society. How is someone even like accused of being a witch, or how is someone outed as being a witch like and then we're talking like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years after the Middle Ages, where paganism has formally kind of died down at this point. So I'm wondering, how is there this revitalization of witchcraft, if you would?
Hmm. Revitalized, I would say that as a person that is from women that have passed down tarot in my family, I would say it's something that was passed down. Very hush hush, very quiet. So I think it is something that lived, but was just very much under the surface. Maybe, again, to my viewpoint, I think it was the next step for women speaking.
Hmm.
I mean, I can't at this point. I can only come up with what's in my mind, which was things that you were on trial for were ridiculous. They said that if you had too many moles, you might be part of the devil.
That's interesting. And
Where we
that's something that
where
happens in Disney, because if you look at the Disney witches, they also have many moles on their face.
so it's like that we know now with science that it's a genetic thing. It's just part of the body. It happens. But they're saying that that's signs of it. If you, I think there were certain parameters for bathing and for dressing. If you got caught, there's a question if you're into witchcraft. For women, if women gathered together for reasons of suspicion, that's another thing. I mean, unless you're making a baby, cooking and knitting, there really wasn't a reason for you to gather together. So that's another thing where honestly, I think that it was fear of patriarch. It was keeping the women also in line. And maybe that is why Salem is so just thought provoking and fascinating, is because of just the level of women that were being just prosecuted and tortured and killed. And I think that was like the stance of like, maybe we're doing this wrong, or maybe this really isn't about evil. I really think at that point it was really women just becoming just more independent, and actually were just being just prosecuted for it. Because again, if you're a female practitioner, you're not a doctor. Only men are doctors.
Hmm. So this is an interesting shift from the Middle Ages, because in the Middle Ages, male or female, you're prosecuted for being a pagan, right?
Yes.
But now when we shift to the Salem witch trials, there's no longer there's no sorcerer that's being prosecuted anymore. It's only witches. It's sort of like a covert way of just going after women's rights. So it's not so much that they're the ones that are, spreading evil versions of alchemy. It's just like, all right, like we have women that are congregating. Maybe they're reading a few too many books in that cottage over there and having too many enlightened ideas. Let's just kind of paint them as witches, whether that's true or not true. And that's just kind of a way to silence their voice.
Yes, I think you summed it up great. Because I mean, I'm sure that there were some men that were trialed, but honestly, there were more women. Another thing is, remember in Christianity, there's no cheating.
Right. Yes.
So even if you were a woman that was just, happy to be with multiple men,
Mm, mm.
and you were caught doing that, that's it. I mean, we have to think of every part of Christian law. And if you did not abide that law, that's what they put you in. They just put you as a deviant, a part of the problem of the community, and therefore you move into that direction. So I think it was used as a scapegoat to just get rid of all the unwanted. I mean, we haven't even touched up on, sadly, people of disability. If you
Right.
only had one eye, or if you were blind, then oh, you're cursed.
That's no, I mean, no,
Like,
so
really? Like,
no, this is really like blowing my mind, because in other words, like, okay, on the Mayflower, for example, there may have been pagans on that Mayflower, but they were just keeping it on the down low. So they may have been wearing a cross on the outside. They may be outwardly reading the Holy Bible, because they would never have allowed an outwardly pagan person on that boat. They would have been like, no,
correct.
no, no, no way. But there may have been pagans on the Mayflower, and successive books, successive boats that came to the New World, and there were probably pagans on there. And then once they got to the New World, then they kind of just like abandoned the facade or the pretense of being Christian, and they kind of went about their pagan ways. And do you think that there were women who maybe just fashioned like just enjoyed having multiple partners, but they didn't necessarily follow any of the other tenets of being a pagan? They just liked,
Correct.
being with many
Yes.
men. Okay.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And I mean, even your little outburst, you have to think of it in my perspective again. We have seen that paganists are very open. So to them, they would not see it as, oh, I'm betraying my gods by now wearing this cross, by wearing this uniform, by holding this Bible and going to America.
Hmm.
No, they would say, this is my path. This is where I am led. And I know that, the God of the sea is going to take us there. The God of the sun is going to heat us and guide us there. And this God that they are talking about is the gods that I worship. So therefore, I don't feel guilty of what I'm doing. I am surviving. But the flip side of that, as a Christian, they would say, no, you must only believe in one. You must only accept Jesus as your savior, and that's it. So you cannot follow anything else. Otherwise, that's heresy.
So there may have been pagans that like even liked some of what they read in the Bible. They may have like read and be like, oh wow, this Jesus guy says some really awesome things here. And they may even adapt some of that, and they don't see wearing the cross as a betrayal of their pagan heritage. They just have like this worldview where they can just kind of mix all of these religions together, without any prejudice.
Correct. They can adapt what they choose to adapt. I think that that is really what many paganists do. And it's kind of like I feel that you can attach yourself, to this code for safety and survival. And that's why, I hope that you can, hear it, that I'm very compassionate about it, because these are times that you and I were not in.
Right.
We
Yeah.
can only like really imagine what people are going through and wanting to find meaning, wanting to find community, wanting to find structure in their life. However, it's just sad that we're still trying to put each other in boxes.
Yes, yes. And even one of the books that just ran through my head was The Scarlet Letter, in the sense that like it's this idea that if you're not following a certain convention, then there's something wrong with you, or there's something inherently evil with you. And I think there's a lot of danger in that kind of thought. And you might like we might disagree about certain things. Like someone might say, well, I believe in monogamy. I believe in like just marriage and so forth. But I think that there's always a danger when you don't have a curiosity about other things. And then you could even take it a step further, not having a curiosity about things, but then even damning it as being evil or something other. Whereas I think that kind of like a code of tolerance is just to have a never-ending curiosity about everything.
I think that's why I got into trouble a lot, because I asked a lot of questions, growing up about Jesus and, his abilities. And I had often asked, other Christians, how come there isn't more text by women? How come we don't read that? How come we don't have their voices? We
Hmm.
only have one or two stories that are really like epic, and that's about it. And, when we think of paganism, there's many gods and many goddesses. And we're supposed to really worship and see each one for their own uniqueness and their own abilities. And all together, they're all powerful, right? And so I was very fascinated by that. And I just never understood why, and this is again me, if I do and I am a believer of Jesus and of God, universal power, why would God be upset with me if I wished to just observe and really honor the physical earth? Let me just honor the ocean. Let me honor the grass. Let me
Hmm.
honor the animals that you made or we made together, these gods and goddesses. So, when I get that way, it's like a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
These are the things that I've thought of, that what was the fear?
Hmm.
What was the fear behind these pilgrim men, these Puritans, to judge and really condemn so many women and men for just voicing out or even questioning or just doing something different than the community?
Do you think it has to do? I mean, one possible answer is this idea of idol worship in the Old Testament, like when Moses comes down after the Ten Commandments, the Israelite, the ancient Hebrews are worshiping like a golden calf. And this is like seen as a giant no-no to kind of embody God in any kind of physical incarnation. So I think perhaps that's an answer as to why there is like somewhat of a backlash to paganism, because there is some kind of very visceral and physical representation of godlike deities, whereas in the Abrahamic tradition, it should not be something that you can see.
Correct. And also put that into the actual cross symbol. We can put that into the actual carvings of Jesus. Those should technically not exist then. No, I'm just giving you that directness too, because it's like, I get it. And I know that with the ox, it was the symbolism of the ox and also the sacrifice of animals. God, that is why in Christianity it is said that that is one of the reasons Jesus came forth, is to eliminate that structure of killing these animals and sacrificing them in the name of, which I found fascinating too, because when we look at the dark side of paganism, they always sacrifice something.
Yes, yes. And it's interesting you mention this, because about the cross and things like that, is that one of the one of the biggest schisms in Christianity was between the Eastern Orthodox and, like during the Byzantine Empire, over the issue of religious icons. Like even having these icons was like a huge debate, where it was believed that no, you should not have any kind of imagery whatsoever. And I guess the Catholic Church would argue that during the Middle Ages, stained glass windows, for example, helped those who were illiterate understand the Bible. So that's kind of where that kind of these icons come from, in the sense that, like, if you're a peasant and you've never learned how to read the Bible, when a priest or a pastor is talking, the only way that you could understand these stories is if the priest would point to the stained glass window and be like, and this is when Moses was doing blah, blah, blah. So it's interesting that we've selectively made exceptions to like some of these images and so forth for I would say it probably helped people learn, right? From like a pedagogical standpoint, like having some people learn through the auditory and some people learn through visual images. But it's interesting that even in the monotheistic religions, these exceptions are made.
Yes, and it is confusing. It is confusing to decipher what is acceptable and what isn't, and what's forgotten and what isn't, and what can we practice now in modern times, which is, or ancient. And I like that we are talking about this today, because it's something that is very refreshing, because I'm with you that we continue that in churches. We have the stained glass, we have the statues, but we're not necessarily putting our devotion into that physical object. We
Okay, yeah.
have that awareness that it's a statue and it's not the real being there. I mean, I don't know about you, but as an empath and as a person that feels, I can go into a church and I could feel that presence. I could feel the difference of that embodiment of that building. I really
Yes.
can. And when I go to a Buddhist temple to meditate, I feel that vibration of those people in meditation and in mantra. So it's just this kind of thought of, how do you worship, can be so many different things. It doesn't have to be just sitting there praying over this statue. To be just simply in being, in yourself, in prayer or in meditation, whatever that is. And that's where, maybe that was questionable with paganists, because they didn't have a lot of places of worship. They worshiped at home, or they worshiped where they could.
Right. I guess it all falls down to your relationship. Like, I guess if you see the stained glass window, I'm just thinking about what you're saying, as just like a learning tool, then you're not directly worshiping it. Like I'm not bowing down and saying that stained glass window has magical powers over me. Like, like if I throw a
Right.
rock through it, like it's kind of just like, okay, this is just a depiction of an event that happened. I'm not actually praying to that window itself. So I think it's this idea of not worshiping like inanimate objects for the and believing that the inanimate object itself has magical powers, and separating that from just that is a depiction of something magical that happened.
Yes, and I think that might be another difference between Christian teachings of the Bible versus pagan. I think in paganism, it is taught to really go inward and to find the power within you versus the power of God. And I mean, I'm of the thought that it is universal. I feel that both are literally saying in different contexts the same thing. And it is our choosing, our free will, of which one we really want to believe. What do we really resonate with and follow? But the whole killing and judging and persecuting just needs to stop. Okay, we just need to stop. It's 2020. We just need to stop there.
No, whether God exists in the inside or whether he's external to us, this is a question I can't, I can't answer. I don't know if anyone can possibly answer these questions, but yes, I agree with you. Like the persecution, all that stuff needs to stop 100%. So we get after the Salem witch trials, and I think you shed a lot of some good light on this, and showing how it wasn't just a like you guys are devil worshippers, but there's also there's a huge congregation of women doing this, and we don't really want women to have this power right now, and that might be at play over here. What ends up happening as after the Salem witch trials? Like, we don't really hear of paganism again. What really goes on between then and now?
Well, I think the population was definitely smaller. So I think, again, it's going under the surface. I think it was then maybe more organized, because definitely what I've seen in tarot is that just in practicing tarot and publishing it, many organizations were the form to produce and publish tarot cards, at least here. I'm saying in the Western world from 18th, 19th century and on. So I think what happened truly is that they really went underground and got together and decided, like, hey, we're just going to start creating our own organizations and our own groups and our own place of quote unquote worship. And you're just going to have a private invitation, an invitation only, with our own structure and password, because we don't want to, deal with this side anymore. And I mean, you could even say, is that really more about business, the formation of the business side of it because of church, and how they've maintained themselves? But that's really only my take. I mean, I think they really had to rebuild from the ground up of so many people being persecuted and having that fear of being outed, and being hunted.
Yes. And I think it was you that told me this, or maybe I read it somewhere, that when tarot cards come out and paganism kind of shifts to a different form, it actually becomes like a hobby of the like upper middle class and maybe even the wealthy to some extent, because I think that I think of these ideas of these like very wealthy women wearing all of this jewelry, going to the fortune teller to be like, oh, will I be in the will, or will I get my husband's inheritance, and all this other stuff. So it's interesting that it kind of goes from being on the underground, and then it kind of gets co-opted by the ultra wealthy as this like alternative like hobby.
Yeah, I think I elaborated about the history of tarot. So
Yeah.
in tarot, it is said that they came from Italian playing cards, which were
Right.
from the wealthy. And then certain astrologers in France and Italy, they created divination and made those cards. But you're correct. I mean, through the 19th century, there were men in stocks, men investing, contacting psychics and tarots to say, what are the lucky numbers? When is a good time to invest? When is it a good time to get out? And, because we didn't have computers. So this was used for that. And that's where I'm saying there is a darker side of paganism. There is a darker side of practicing witchcraft that is there, and it's for various reasons. And the only reason why I say that it is quote unquote bad is because it's at the sake of somebody else. It's an
Right.
exchange of really harming on an energetic, physical, spiritual, emotional level to someone else. Good is more of a healing component.
It's funny because I'm actually seeing what you're saying now a lot more with the men and women thing, because in the 19th and perhaps early 20th century, if a bunch of rich dudes start getting into this, now it becomes legit, right? Like when the rich guy is like, yeah, I'm going to use this tarot card reading to pick what stocks are going to go up, in the stock market, then suddenly that's okay, right? Then witchcraft is totally cool if it can get me wealthier. But then if it's a bunch of women practicing it in a cottage, whoa, 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 that's satanic devil worship.
Well, we also start getting into the movies, and they
Yeah.
make it mysterious and spooky with seances, and are there spirits, are there ghosts, and having that part of it. And that's where, it makes it more alluring and interesting, but still you don't quite know about it really.
Yes. And I think actually Houdini does a really good job of, like, he's not, I wouldn't call him a pagan, but he sort of like brings legitimacy to magic, or just other realms of things, like curiosity. I think Houdini allows like curiosity and this idea of dabbling with magic or the unknown, and maybe that creates a broader acceptance for fortune tellers, and that, because I think that becomes like a part of the pop culture of the 1920s, like to a huge extent.
Yes, I agree.
When we have, I think that a lot of us view things with suspicion until the elites or people who we perceive to be powerful start doing it. Once they start doing it, then any kind of negative connotation that's attached to it begins to kind of just drip away. And for whatever reason, I don't know why this is, it seems like after the 1950s, paganism then went back into being something dark and spooky again, and I'm wondering why that is. Like we it's interesting that in some ways we were more enlightened about paganism in the 1920s, but then in the after the 50s we somehow fall back into a dark age. I'm wondering what happened.
Well, hold on. We have the 60s where, and I wouldn't say that it's like tied to paganism, but it's definitely that attitude. What about free love? What
Hmm.
about meditation and psychedelic drugs? About finding yourself, man, like being part of a community, like all of that is still on that realm. It's not saying, hey, you got to sit down, you got to pray, you got to keep your head down. No, it was about, standing up to the man. It was about voicing a collective community, about human rights, about civil rights, about really coming together. I still think that is, again, a very huge slogan of paganism, and all of those umbrellas in there.
That's interesting, because I've always viewed the counterculture as, like, you have like a guy like Alan Watts, and I always see that as like borrowing from like Eastern Buddhism, in the sense like of because I see meditation and mindfulness as being like an Eastern thing that we borrowed. Tell me what about the counterculture specifically comes from paganism? Like I'm curious if you
Well,
could.
in Eastern, Tibetans have multiple deities, female and they are male. They have multiple hands and multiple heads, and they conjure. One of my favorite goddesses is Kali. Kali is evil. She's all of hurricanes and storms and devastation. But you need that in order to find rebirth, right? You
Hmm.
have to struggle. You have to kind of destroy a sense of yourself to become anew. And so that is one of their deities there. Now, I know that that's also part of Hinduism as well, that they have Kali, but that's a perfect example there, that Christians would say that's not appropriate because there's multiple deities. But Tibetans don't necessarily worship. They have a shrine where
Hmm.
they put things out. But in Buddhism, they do not worship the Buddha. They worship mindfulness. They really honor removing the ego and becoming really one and enlightened, all knowing. And so that's removing all attachments to life.
This is interesting because I think that maybe in the 1960s, Eastern philosophy kind of gets clumped in with paganism. I think this is like a distinction here, whereas maybe before then we actually just saw it as something that happened in the East, but now that kind of gets fused into this in some way. and simply for the reason being that there's multiple gods, at least like with Hinduism. There is, some Hindus would argue that Brahma is all of these gods and it's really a monotheistic religion, but that's a whole nother discussion. But it's interesting that the Eastern religions get clumped in with paganism, and that kind of creates a whole nother set of culture where now it's not only the European version of paganism, but now the Eastern world is also kind of clumped into that same box under the counterculture.
I'm only doing that right now because it's technically, by that definition, it's not just one god, there are many gods. And
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
the only reason why I'm doing that. But I mean, really, thank God where we are, because honestly, we got into yoga. And can you imagine if we time ported the pilgrims into now and they see women in pants doing
Yes.
yoga and all that, they would be like, oh my God, the devil won, you know? And it's like, no.
But that's interesting because I think when Indian women alone were doing yoga, it probably had some bad connotations. But then all of a sudden, you had some really upper class women and when I think of, I live in New York, I think where the first yoga studios opened, they probably opened up in some fairly affluent areas. And it's like when the affluent class started doing yoga, it was only then that no longer became like a taboo thing. It became, oh, this is a healthy version of exercise.
Correct. It was actually two men gurus from India, and only
Ah,
one
okay.
of them came over to the United States, I think, in the early 50s, I think. And that's when we started really accepting and being open to yoga. And there were seminars and photographs. I'm not going to pronounce his name right, but he has a wonderful book. The Beatles all read it. There's a great Netflix documentary, so there's enough for you to find it. But it's interesting that was not condemned,
Right. Yes.
right?
Yes.
Like, and we go again with questioning. Okay, why is that acceptable?
Yeah, no, this is interesting, and I would argue now leaving the 60s and moving on to today, I feel like yoga and Buddhism have once again separated from paganism. It's interesting because I see it kind of as a zigzag. So maybe in the 60s they were like people were confused or they just didn't differentiate between the two and they were clumped into the same box. I think as we get into the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, yoga becomes yoga. It becomes like its thing, and
Yep.
Buddhism becomes its own thing. But now paganism has become its own thing once again, and this time it's once again in the negative light of these are evil people that go out in the woods and they sacrifice animals. Like it has all of these very negative connotations. Now that we've kind of separated the Eastern religion stuff out of it, why again has it gotten this negative rap? And I'm talking, let's say 2000 and above.
Well, I think it's about who's talking about it.
Okay.
And I think only now, I love that. I love the motto, 2020, 20 vision. I really love that. That's a very spiritualist kind of motto right now, where light workers, the people that work through the light, are really showing the evil. They're showing the darkness of the world. And I don't know. I feel like we as a human species are very attracted to fear and the dark and the unknown. And I mean, that's all well and good that we should know about it. But I agree with you, it shouldn't be the only thing that we know about it. And
Mm,
quite honestly, at least here in the United States, we come with a very sense of gluttony. We're just known for it. We overeat, we're overweight, we're overstressed, we're overtired,
mm,
and we look for all these different things to kind of better ourselves. So I think that this is a part of that. It's really showing this dark side of humanity. Now, why is it always with paganism? I think it's just through the history that we've just uncovered.
mm,
But I also think right now, at least in my profession as a tarot reader, I'm seeing it, and I am so thankful and want to say thank you to all the brave people out there that are really putting out their energy, doing Reiki, doing massage, doing yoga, doing psychic abilities, all these people that are really projecting that and showing these different ways of healing is really the goodness, is showing that you can heal inward and you don't need anything external. Now, the negative of paganism is the external. It's what can I get out of you? Can I manipulate in you? What can I get you to do for me? In exchange, I receive power, I receive reputation, I receive fame, I receive all these different things that are really about I, about ego. And so I think that's why it's in this limelight, because people are asking all these things that have gone through history. I mean, to me, honestly, I see it in regards to reincarnation. I see it as we're just in this big cycle that's just looping over and over and over again. And as a tarot reader, I'm looking at it as, when the hell are we going to learn?
I'm latching on to what you said now about the external stuff. So I think maybe paganism threatens like materialism in some way. Maybe because like if there's, for example, if I can just do yoga, and again, like I said, I think in the 2000s maybe yoga became its own thing, but if I engage in some form of paganism and that kind of completes me and that kind of takes me away from like material cravings, then that might pose as like a danger to our society. And maybe that's why it's getting this like very negative tint, because it's telling people, hey, you don't really need all this stuff. You can kind of be happy in nature. And that kind of conflicts with our you need to buy a bigger house sort of mentality.
Well, I'm going to get into it. How about, Aaron? You are the man that you are because you define the man that you are. You're not defined by Tommy Hilfiger. You're not defined by the models of what a man should be. You don't have to put on some certain cream to have beautiful, firm skin. You don't have to own a specific vehicle to feel as if you're a man, or a particular
Thank you.
house, or a particular
I love
title.
myself so much more now.
Good. I hope you do, because I mean, these are the messages that are exuded out, that you're not good enough.
mm,
And I
mm.
think when you get down to earth, you realize that all of that is an illusion.
Yes, there's something, I like what you're speaking. It reminds me, I was just like a few months ago, I was on a trip, with my girlfriend in Maine, and I was looking at these trees and I was looking at just nature, right? And I wasn't practicing paganism, I was just appreciating nature. And it kind of like when you're looking at nature, you don't really focus on like what brand car you're driving. You know what I mean? Like the tree and the power of looking at a tree and the power of looking at a mountain negates that I drove like a Dodge or something like that, right? Like you don't care about a Mercedes when you're awed and inspired by that of nature.
I mean, when you look at the moon, you're enamored with the moon on how it looks. And then you think about it and say, oh man, we had a man land on the moon.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
think about that. You think about how significant that is. You not only are honoring the nature, but you see how far we've come. When we look at the trees have been here a lot longer than us, and it's survived. It doesn't need us. We're not sitting there watering the tree. I mean, we can if we want to, but it's there just fine. And that's the observations that I think we've lost touch with. We're so
Yes.
enamored with technology. We're so enamored with what's going on everywhere. Where when you slow down, even just a little bit, you find this connection that you and I can't even really express enough. There's just not enough words to really have that inner feeling and inner knowing like you did.
Yes, yes. Fedra, I think that's a great place to leave off. Thank you so much for being on the show day and giving our listeners and myself a nice intro to paganism.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And again, thank you for the opportunity. And I hope that people will get more in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This concludes the 52nd episode of the Truth Island podcast. I'm Aaron Azrod.